Pam Bondi had barely settled into her chair when Senator John Kennedy delivered a blunt opening that instantly silenced the room. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't theatrical. But it hit with undeniable force. If people lose faith in the justice system, he warned, everything else collapses. That single statement cut straight to the core of the hearing. Because it wasn't aimed only at Bondi, it was a message to the entire nation watching. What followed was one of the clearest and most uncomfortable explanations of America's legal crisis, delivered in Kennedy's signature style. Calm on the surface, sharp underneath, and impossible to ignore. He didn't rant. He didn't posture. He walked Bondi step by step into a reality few officials want to confront out loud. He began by laying the foundation. If Americans start to believe that the Department of Justice is acting unfairly or illegitimately, he asked, doesn't that make them less willing to accept the outcomes of prosecutions and court rulings? Bondi agreed. He pushed further. And if people stop trusting those outcomes, aren't they also less likely to respect and follow the laws passed by Congress and enforced by the DOJ? Again, she agreed. Then Kennedy delivered the consequence. If that trust disappears, what follows isn't disagreement. It's chaos. And with chaos, the social contract itself breaks down. Bondi had no choice but to acknowledge it. Then Kennedy shifted gears, not with theory, but with examples. He asked her if she remembered Michael Avenatti. Years ago, Avenatti dominated cable news. He was everywhere in Washington media circles, praised relentlessly, booked constantly, and celebrated largely because he attacked Donald Trump nonstop. Kennedy pointed out that Avenatti seemed to live on television, appearing so often it felt like he had his own permanent studio seat. Then came the turn. Where is Michael Avenatti now? Bondi answered plainly. He's in prison. Kennedy made the point unmistakable. Avenatti wasn't brought down by politics. He wasn't targeted for his views. He was a criminal, and the justice system put him behind bars. That, Kennedy emphasized, is exactly how the system is supposed to work. Next, he brought up another name everyone recognized. Sam Bankman-Fried, the so-called financial prodigy, the billionaire wunderkind, the tech-savvy genius who believed his intelligence and wealth placed him above consequences. Kennedy described how Bankman-Fried moved through elite circles, meeting world leaders, former presidents, and powerful figures, dressing casually, acting untouchable, and believing the rules simply didn't apply to him. Kennedy's point wasn't about personality or appearance. It was about accountability. No matter how famous, wealthy, or connected someone becomes, legitimacy in the justice system only survives if consequences still apply. When powerful figures face justice just like everyone else, trust holds. When they don't, trust collapses. And that was the warning shot Bondi walked into before the real questioning even began. Kennedy wasn't accusing. He wasn't speculating. He was laying out the stakes. The Department of Justice doesn't just enforce laws. It holds together the belief that those laws mean something. Once that belief is gone, enforcement becomes meaningless. The room understood it instantly. This wasn't about one case, one person, or one administration. It was about whether Americans still believe the system applies equally, or whether legitimacy itself is slowly slipping away. Kennedy didn't stop there. He pressed forward, asking where Sam Bankman-Fried is today. Bondi answered simply, prison. Kennedy nodded and made the point unmistakable. Bankman-Fried wasn't taken down by media pressure or public opinion. He was a crook, and the Department of Justice put him behind bars. That, Kennedy said, is exactly how the system should work. Then he shifted tone, deliberately. He acknowledged something important, something no one in the room could dispute. The Department of Justice is filled with good people, dedicated prosecutors, federal agents, law enforcement officers who put their lives on the line every single day. Bondi agreed. Many great men and women serve honorably across DOJ and its agencies, but Kennedy wasn't finished. Agreement on the good wasn't enough. He asked the harder question. Can we also agree that there have been, and may still be, bad actors inside the Department of Justice? Bondi answered carefully but conceded the point. And Kennedy explained why that mattered. For years, he said, transparency had been lacking. The curtains were drawn tight. And in that environment, even a small minority of officials can cause enormous damage. In his view, that minority had done exactly that. They had weakened the legitimacy of the entire justice system. Then Kennedy delivered the most explosive statement of the exchange. The most destabilizing act he had witnessed in decades, possibly in the department's history, was the decision by Attorney General Merrick Garland to criminally prosecute a former president of the United States. Not only that, but to do so after that former president had announced he was running against Garland's boss. Bondi asked for clarification. Was he suggesting the prosecution of a political opponent? Kennedy didn't hesitate. That's exactly what he was suggesting. He paused, then delivered the line that landed hardest. That kind of decision doesn't happen by accident. It takes planning. And it was reckless. Not just because of who was targeted, but because of what it normalized. America, he said, had never crossed that line before. That's the kind of thing that happens in unstable countries. Not here. And once the seal is broken, Kennedy warned, it can't be resealed. Once prosecution becomes a political tool, it invites retaliation from every direction. Ambitious prosecutors on both sides will start looking for targets. He painted a stark picture. Somewhere right now, he said, a prosecutor may be considering charges against President Biden's inner circle, accusing them of conspiring to conceal his mental decline. Not because justice demands it, but because the precedent has been set. That's the road we're heading down, Kennedy warned. And it leads nowhere good. Then he turned directly to Bondi with a challenge. Fix it, restore legitimacy. Find the bad actors, root them out, and remove them. Find the good ones and elevate them. But do it based on facts, not politics, not pressure, not ambition, because once Americans stop believing the justice system is fair, everything else begins to unravel. And that, Kennedy made clear. Is the real danger hanging over the country right now? Bondi's response said almost as much as Kennedy's words. She spoke carefully, choosing each sentence with precision, sounding like someone who suddenly understood she was being asked to help repair a system many Americans already believe is breaking apart. Kennedy didn't ease up. He framed the issue in language so direct that even people who rarely follow politics could grasp the stakes instantly. This wasn't abstract theory, he said. Legitimacy is the backbone of the justice system. When people believe the system is fair, they respect the law. When they believe it's rigged or corrupted, that respect disappears. Obedience fades, trust collapses, and the social contract begins to tear apart. Bondi agreed with him point by point. But the most striking part wasn't her agreement. It was the contrast. Her calm, measured tone stood in sharp opposition to the explosive reality Kennedy was describing. He wasn't speaking hypothetically. He was pointing to real cases, real people, and real moments that have shaped how Americans now view justice in this country. Kennedy began with a name that once dominated headlines nonstop. A loud, relentless media figure. A lawyer who turned cable news into a personal stage and built fame by attacking anyone in his path. For years, he was everywhere. Then Kennedy asked a simple question. Where is he now? Bondi answered plainly, prison. The fall wasn't political. It wasn't partisan. It happened because crimes were committed, and in that moment, the justice system worked exactly as it should. Kennedy used that example to make a critical distinction. The Department of Justice is not a single entity. It is a massive institution filled with dedicated prosecutors, investigators, and agents who risk their lives daily to uphold the law. But it also contains a much smaller group with the power to misuse authority, bend rules, and undermine public trust. The good actors hold the system together. The bad ones can unravel it from the inside. And Kennedy made it clear that the balance between those two forces feels more fragile now than ever before. Then he raised the stakes again. He mentioned another name, one recognized around the world. A tech billionaire once celebrated as a genius. Someone who mingled with former presidents and global leaders while presenting himself as harmless and eccentric. At first, his behavior seemed quirky. Over time, it revealed something far more dangerous. And once again, Bondi confirmed the outcome. This man, too, now sits behind bars. Each example carried the same message. When the justice system applies the law evenly, regardless of power or popularity, it earns public trust. But when that consistency breaks, the damage spreads far beyond any single case. A dramatic rise followed by an even more dramatic fall. These cases served as a powerful reminder that wealth, influence, and fame do not always shield someone from accountability. And that was exactly Kennedy's point. He wasn't choosing examples at random. He was drawing a sharp contrast. When fraud is obvious and the evidence is undeniable, the justice system can act quickly and decisively. That's what Americans expect. That's how public confidence is built and maintained. But Kennedy made clear that trust collapses the moment politics enters the equation. Even the perception of political motivation is enough to poison the system. And that's where he made his most controversial argument. He said the Department of Justice crossed a dangerous line when it pursued criminal charges against a former president, not because former leaders should be above the law, but because the timing, the legal reasoning, and the theories behind the charges created the appearance that political advantage mattered more than impartial justice. According to Kennedy, that decision did something unprecedented. It cracked the foundation of the justice system in a way the country has never experienced before. He argued that the move didn't feel rooted in fairness, but in influence. And once the justice system is seen as a tool to go after political opponents, the country enters uncharted and dangerous territory. Bondi listened closely as Kennedy described a fear shared by millions of Americans, the fear that justice is no longer neutral. He warned that once this seal is broken, it can't simply be repaired. When one side uses prosecutions against political rivals, the other side eventually responds. At that point, the law stops being a safeguard and becomes a weapon. Accountability turns into retaliation. Kennedy predicted that somewhere in the country right now, an ambitious prosecutor may already be considering future charges against today's leadership. Not because justice demands it, but because the precedent has been set. And that, he said, is the real danger. When every election becomes a prelude to indictments, when every outgoing administration fears legal retribution, and when political mistakes are treated as criminal acts, democracy itself begins to erode. In that kind of environment, governance stops being about leadership and becomes about survival. Power changes hands not to serve the public but to avoid punishment. And once that cycle begins, stability gives way to revenge, and revenge eventually leads to collapse. Kennedy then raised another concern looming over the political landscape: ongoing public debate about the current president's mental fitness. He didn't accuse. He didn't speculate. Instead, he issued a warning. In a system where political prosecutions are normalized, even conversations like these could someday be twisted into legal action. And once that happens, there are no clear limits left. Online commentators have already begun questioning whether certain major decisions were truly made independently or quietly influenced by unseen hands working behind the curtain. Whether those suspicions are accurate or not almost doesn't matter. The danger lies in how easily that speculation can be turned into a weapon. And that is exactly the cycle Senator Kennedy warned about. A system where the law is no longer used to protect justice, but instead deployed to eliminate political enemies. Bondi appeared fully aware of the seriousness of what was being placed on her shoulders. Kennedy didn't soften his message. He told her plainly that restoring legitimacy requires action, not slogans. She must identify those inside the system who damage public trust. Elevate the people who uphold the law with integrity. Remove the ones who twist legal power for personal or political benefit. And most importantly, she must never convince herself that settling political scores through prosecution is acceptable, no matter how justified it might feel in the moment, because retaliation does not heal institutions. Two wrongs do not create balance. They don't rebuild confidence. They only push the system closer to collapse. That was the core of Kennedy's warning. Once the justice system turns into a battlefield instead of a safeguard, the damage goes far beyond courtrooms and elections. The country loses stability. it loses order. And it loses the shared trust that holds everything together. Kennedy's final words were not theatrical. They weren't designed for headlines. They sounded like a plea, a warning, and a directive all at once. Restore legitimacy to the Department of Justice. The room fell silent. The stakes were unmistakable. And Bondi left knowing that the task ahead wasn't about winning partisan battles. It was about stopping the legal system from becoming a weapon that could ultimately turn the nation against itself. Now the question shifts to you. Do you believe the justice system can still be repaired? Have political prosecutions gone too far? And what do you think happens if this cycle continues unchecked? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this breakdown helped you see the issue more clearly, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on notifications. The next video goes even deeper into this controversy, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next.